Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, depending on where you are joining us from today. And what a turnout we have for our webinar today. You are joining 254 of your business colleagues from around the world to learn about voice biometrics from the leaders in this field. Welcome to today's webinar, Voice Biometrics in a Multimodal Future. My name is Peter O'Neill, and I'm the president of Find Biometrics and Mobile ID World. The identification industry is moving very quickly now on all fronts, from healthcare, payments, banking, mobility, enterprise, border control, national ID, government programs. Just about every vertical market is very active and growing. Be sure to stay on top of all this breaking news by visiting Find Biometrics, or if mobility is more your focus, our sister site, Mobile ID World. Now in our 14th year, we cover the market like no one else, with in-depth articles, insights, the largest yearly review of our industry, newsletters, interviews with the leaders in this space, and of course, our now famous webinar series. And this month, all month long, we are focusing on voice biometrics. We have a lot to cover today, so I'm going to jump right in. Please note, to ask a question, just type it into the dialog box in the Go-To control panel on the right side of your screens. And please do this at any time. Don't wait until the end, as this will give us an opportunity to manage your questions, and we'll do our best to answer as many as possible, and there will be many given the number of attendees today. This webinar will last about 40 minutes in total and will be recorded and available at findbiometrics.com. I'd now like to take this opportunity to thank our sponsors for their continuing support, Agnitio, VoiceVault, and SpeechPro. To start off our discussions today, we are very fortunate to have with us the leading analyst in voice biometrics, Dan Miller. Dan has over 30 years experience in marketing, business development, and corporate strategy. He founded Opus in 1985 and helped define the conversational commerce marketplace by authoring scores of reports, advisories, and newsletters addressing business opportunities that reside where automated speech leverages web services, mobility, and enterprise software infrastructure. He received his BA from Hampshire College and an MBA from Columbia University. He also runs one of the top voice conferences called VBC New York, Voice Security and Authentication Conference, May 4th to the 5th, 2015, and that's one definitely you want to put on your calendar. That's VBC New York, May 4 to 5. Dan will be providing us with an industry overview to kick things off. So, over to you, Dan.
Thank you, Peter. Well, since the introduction was so long, I'll try to be brief with my comments. I really appreciate participating in this. I appreciate that you're putting together Voice Month. And, you know, as the turnout indicates, it's very, very timely. So I'll skip Opus research background because you had just mentioned that. But I will mention that we have a couple of reports that just came out. One is the census and forecast for voice biometrics implementations, primarily in contact centers around the world. And we've also issued a document of best practices for voice biometrics in the enterprise, which will address some of the issues we talk about today, including how to integrate it in existing security infrastructure and how to integrate voice biometrics with other biometric factors as well as security factors. So we can move to the next slide. There we go. As far as the findings from the census, one of the reasons why it's very timely to have a conference like this and for you to declare it Voice Month is we're seeing tremendous growth recently, exponential growth in implementation of voice biometrics and enrollments primarily among a number of vertical industries, which I'll discuss. So the growth is the result of there being adoption, primarily in financial services. The technology has proven both that it's effective and that it scales both in enterprise settings and to support mobile applications, which is only just now clicking in. But we're seeing more verticals, broader reach. I'm very I live in North America. What's been amazing is to see patterns of adoption among financial institutions, government entities, telephone companies. The largest implementation happens to be at a Turkish mobile company. And we're just now starting to see or expect to see more of growth in the North American and U.S. market. And we're also expecting to see growth as more mobile applications find the need to use, well, it'll go like this, that we'll see the securing of mobile endpoints, smartphones essentially, requiring better authentication of the individuals using those secure endpoints. So that's something to keep in mind. And this notion of ephemeral instances, this is where voice biometrics comes in handy for telelearning, for instances where you don't keep the voice prints forever. You don't, it's used for things like speaker change detection to make sure that an individual that's enrolled in a course is the one taking exams and that sort of thing. And we can move on to the next slide. A quick breakout of the census. This is just an example of the kind of readouts. This is by vertical market, and it's looking at the number of voice prints and also the number of deployments. One thing we found out that was surprising is that the number of enrollments is approaching like 70 million individuals, and these aren't, as the AP reported, the government's harvesting voice prints in the headline writers Argo or Argot. This is individuals that have enrolled in services from their banks, from their telephone company, and that sort of thing. So you can get more detail on from the census, and we can move on a little bit about what the main drivers are on the next slide.
Before we leave this one, can I just ask a quick question about this slide? The slide on the left, the number of deployments. Dan, what might this have, say, 3 years ago?
Well, 3 years ago,
what finance being up at 32%, what has changed most dramatically in your view over the last 3 years?
Well, clearly we're seeing a trend here. The financial services companies, and Julia and Alexei and Jesus can talk about this. There are a lot of trials, there are a lot of things going on internally, and what you would have seen 3 years ago is essentially the telcos were the early adopters, financial services were kind of tire kickers, so they would have had less going on. The initial interest was driven by evaluation of the use of voice biometrics by government agencies to be part of their transfer payment systems. So these have all had a long, we're going to see those areas growing as a product of sort of a long gestation period for getting to understand where voice fits in, for voice technology providers learning more about how you integrate with existing infrastructure, et cetera.
Thanks, Dan. That answers that.
Cool. So what were the drivers? Clearly, eliminating fraud, reducing fraud losses has been a big driver of ROI, especially in the face of these high-profile breaches. There's a connection between theft of personal information and awareness that we need to secure things better, and voice biometrics is an answer. We're going to hear more about this during this webcast. And then going down the road, the idea of strong authentication of individuals is the foundation of trusted conversation. You mentioned that I cover conversational commerce. Those are greatly enhanced when you have confidence as a company that the individual you're talking to is whom he or she claims to be, and ditto for the individuals who are using those devices, just wanting to know that the connection is secure, that their privacy is respected, and that sort of thing. Next slide, and then we'll get on to the meat of this. So the time is now. What we're seeing right now is stuff driven by the likes of FIDO and others in terms of getting rid of, having an alternative to challenge questions, to passwords which are getting more complex and that sort of thing. We're seeing a lot driven by the proliferation of smartphones as the major tool that individuals use, not just for their mobile life, but for their entire digital life, because they have browsers, they have these apps that define our digital existence, and there are demonstrable benefits for strong authentication among individuals. And ditto for the enterprise. I mentioned fraud loss reduction, that the idea of rapidly identifying an individual by their voice, by other biometric factors, gets them more quickly through the authentication process, and it leads to shorter, less expensive interactions with, with their customer base. So a lot of these issues will be brought up at BBC in New York, and happy to raise. I know you're going to be there, Peter, so I'm looking forward to that. But let's move on to the speakers and the feature presentations.
Dan, thank you so much for the overview. And now I'd like to introduce our other panelists for today. From Agnicio Jesus Aragon, who's joining us from Spain today, VP Corporate Business Development and Marketing. Julia Webb, who's the Executive Vice President, Sales and Marketing at VoiceVault. And Alexei Kitrov, who's the President and CEO at SpeechPro USA. And just as a side note, Julia was one of the first people I ever met in this industry and did an interview with 14 years ago. Yikes. Okay, so the first question to our panel. Dan spoke a little bit about this, but I'd like to hear from you. What are some of the vertical markets that you have found that have really embraced voice biometrics? Jesus, why don't you start us off with this one?
Sure, Peter. Thank you for having us today, and thank you, Dan, for putting some context into the call. So as Dan highlighted, the trends that we see in the industry where voice biometrics has been adopted is very much in line with what Dan presented a few minutes ago. What we see is that if you ask about where voice is deployed today, we need to talk about government and banking. Government is a really broad area. So, inside government you have forensics, you have law enforcement, you have intelligence, and we see another area trending up, which is e-government services. So how governments are providing services to citizens. I'm talking about retirement funds. So there is a couple of deployments already, and this is trending up again, where they need a proof of life that is cost effective to manage, a retirement funds deployment to citizens. So this is trending up from the government perspective. Banking, certainly another big area for us. Mainly on the call center. You could do a bunch of things on the call center. Either you use the call center to authenticate users, or you use the call center to identify fraud. And these are two of the main areas that banks are focusing on with voice biometrics. Fraud prevention is huge because the return investment there for banks is amazing. It's a very little investment with a huge return. Also in banking, there is another area, mobile banking. And here, the topic of the agenda today is multi-factor. We see a big trend where banking applications are getting used to biometrics, multi-factor, using face and fingerprint and voice, and we know that the world is going to be multi-factor, so there's going to be a combination of those elements in mobile banking and mobile payments. For us, as Agnicio, we see another big trend, which is mobile. If you ask me,
Jesus, I'm just going to cut you off there because we'll get back into the mobile side of things in a second. Julia and Alexei, can you add into this question, please?
Yeah, hi everyone. It's Julia Webb from VoiceVault. So, just to echo what was said here, I think the production deployments that we've primarily seen in the marketplace to date are around riskier transactions where you're looking for stronger customer authentication and looking for less frictionless and lower cost alternative to knowledge-based authentication and tokens. I think the positive trend that's happening right now is those organizations that have rolled out voice biometrics for those riskier transactions are now looking at broader rollouts to their consumer base because they've seen the benefits of that positive user experience.
Thank you. Alexei, do you want to add in on that?
Absolutely. Just a few points here. I think three key areas that we would the three key areas of interest: the financial, the government, and healthcare. In financial, the backlash of the knowledge-based authentication is a very high rate of false reject when people essentially don't remember the information that the banks are asking them to provide, and that creates a very expensive and unfriendly user experience. And the voice biometrics can certainly help here, especially in the call center environment. In mobile, the use of the multi-factor really opens up a very new level of security and convenience for customers. When we talk to the government, I think an important concept that we see trending these days is the proof of life. A lot of the governments are looking for cost-effective ways to make sure that that they're paying social benefits and pensions to the people that are still alive, and voice biometric is certainly the good way to check that information and prevent fraud. And finally, healthcare. Things like Ebola really are pushing healthcare providers to do the to move the authentication into the contactless environment, and that's where voice biometrics, that's where we get a lot of the information, a lot of the interest from the healthcare providers. So that's a new and trending area that we see on the marketplace.
Thanks, Alexei. You know, I've personally had that experience, the first one you mentioned, with banks asking for information that I totally forgot what I had informed them of, and so it can create a very bad experience, and absolutely correct. Second question, when is multi-factor...
25.
Go ahead. Okay.
According to some of the studies that we've seen, the false reject with some of the knowledge-based type of application is about 25%, and this, of course, a horrible user experience.
Thanks. When is multi-factor authentication useful, and when is it not? Julia, can you jump in on this one?
Sure. So I would say overall multi-factor authentication makes sense when there's a level of risk that warrants it, or when it generally improves the customer experience. Having worked, as you said, Peter, in the biometric industry for some time, it's my experience that successful biometric deployments have one thing in common, and that's a positive user experience. So the enrollment and verification must be as frictionless as possible while providing security levels that are appropriate for the application. Users will generally exert more effort to prove their identity if the transaction carries more risk. And I think this is where the decision to use multi-factor comes into play. So JP Morgan, I think, has done a very good job of this with their Access mobile application. They leverage voice biometrics and a swipe PIN and device ID for their users both to log into their app as well as to release ACH payments and wire transfers. The important thing here is those transfers are millions of dollars, so their customers are willing to provide that swipe PIN and their voice to authenticate. However, I think there's some other applications where a single factor is just fine and maybe a more convenient way to authenticate over having to type in a strong password in a small form factor.
Thanks, Julia. Jesus or Alexei, do you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, I 100% agree with Julia. This is about, I mean, people are moving towards biometrics because of security and because of convenience. So multi-factor is a great way to provide both. You will use one method or another, or a combination, depending on the situation and the risk of the transaction. When it's not a good idea to do multi-factor, we've seen, everybody's trying to get into biometrics now. So if you're looking into buying a biometric system, you need to understand why you're getting a multi-factor solution. If the reason is because the individual technologies don't make it to the the 99.9% accuracy that you need, and they only get to 90%, and the way to get to that level is adding another factor, that's not a good idea. So you need to make sure that multi-factor is done for the right reasons, and the right reasons is risk management. So that's what I would say.
Okay, thank you very much. I'm going to jump into the next question, and Alexi, I'd like for you. Yep.
Just a quick comment here. I think that it's well established that they having two modalities can provide a more accurate biometric results than one modality. The question is, as the panelists just pointed out, is can we maintain and create a very friendly user experience, and that's the key here. And what we see at SpeechPro is that the combination of voice and face in the mobile environment is we see is the trending combination right now, and the reason for it is because the collection devices are already in the hands of practically every single user out there in the forms of the smartphones or laptops and computers. So you don't require any additional hardware from the users here. You can also collect the biometric information simultaneously, so you can actually create this user-friendly experience by collecting voice and face at the same time, and you can create some additional layers of anti-spoofing and security by combining voice and face.
Thanks, Alexi. Third question, now that consumers are being given biometric technology on mobile devices, how does voice recognition fit into the mobile biometric ecosystem? With so many modalities becoming available, how is voice carving out a niche? Alexi, can you start off with this one?
Oh, absolutely. When we're talking about the voice recognition, we're talking about the technology that helps to understand the content of the speech. And one of the trends that we see is the emergence of virtual assistants and virtual assistants on the web and on the mobile platforms that help people to get to the products and services through speech rather than through touching and clicking. And voice biometrics actually works perfectly in that environment if we deploy text-independent voice biometric algorithms and use the speech that people and clients of the virtual assistant services provide to get to the information they're looking for, and use that speech for the voice biometric services as well. So again, we're going back to the idea of providing a very transparent and user-friendly way of biometric authentication. So we see a great potential in using voice biometric technologies within the virtual assistant interfaces.
Thanks, Alexi. Julia, can you jump in on this one? This is a heavy question.
Sure. So there's definitely a niche for voice biometrics. We've seen, I think we have to look specifically at Touch ID and Apple Pay as really validating that consumers are ready to embrace biometrics in general for authentication, and probably most importantly for payments. As Tim Cook announced last month, $2 out of every $3 spent on contactless payments here in the U.S. were made with Touch ID. And so that's what we've seen from a mobile app developer standpoint, is they're looking to say, okay, well, first we need to support Touch ID within our apps, but then we also need to acknowledge that not every smartphone out there has a fingerprint sensor. So how else do we facilitate this biometric authentication that consumers are embracing within our apps? And we're seeing those mobile app developers look to voice biometrics.
Thank you. Jesus?
Yeah, Peter. when you talk about mobile, you know, you can talk about the high end, the mid end, and the low end. We see voice as a perfect companion to other biometric solutions like fingerprint, for example. So, you know, voice is perfect for high end as a multi-factor approach. In the mid and the low end of smartphones and the mobile ecosystem, you're not going to have room and BOM to add an expensive fingerprint sensor. So voice potentially is going to be the only you know, biometric solution that is going to be able to play in the low and the mid end. What I would say is, what does it mean mobile? I mean, when you deploy a voice biometric solution in mobile, what does it mean? Do you need a server to run the voice biometric engine, or you run it locally? So this is a big question, because like Alexei, you know, virtual assistants can benefit from this, but there is a huge privacy concern where you're going to store the voice print from the user. So if you're doing this on the server, there is certainly a big privacy concern. So you know, I would say that trending in mobile is gonna be around running all biometrics processing on the mobile environment without having to locally on the device, without having to access the server. So privacy is going to be a big concern in mobile, as you know, Apple highlighted. I mean, Apple even sent a paper to the Senate explaining how they protect the fingerprint credentials from the user. So this is certainly going to be a big deal moving forward.
Thank you. Next question. There has been a lot of talk regarding voice biometrics' role in the Internet of Things. Here's a hot topic. What are some of the potential applications for voice authentication in the Internet of Things? And Dan, can you start us off on this one?
Yeah, let me give a little grounding to it. You know, I'm loving this conversation. So, and it's a perfect lead-in, because you know, what's really happening is we're transferring sort of control of what biometric factors should be applied over to the individual. And, you know, to Jesus's point about, you know, what is mobile, well, our lives are lived centrally. We are the center of our universe, and a lot of what's happening with virtual assistants, with the Internet of Things, ideally is about self-service. And the Internet of Things is about the world, about us in the world sort of being surrounded by sensors of sorts. And I'll give a few instances. There's a weighted average of forces that are dictating when biometric authentication is called for. And we talked about security, we've talked about convenience, but in the Internet of Things, it will be about personalization. So, you know, something like, and I'm not endorsing Amazon's Echo and even saying that it has voice biometrics on it, but one of the things about having a device in your house that listens and has multiple microphones is that the designers are already thinking about identifying which individual is talking from which side of the room and that sort of thing for control of that device and what that device can do. The next step beyond sort of detecting where somebody is and that they are indeed talking will be who they are. And that's where biometrics, where voice biometrics is going to come in. And that's sort of the household instance where there'll be settings on personal entertainment devices or things like that, where your settings are different from other family members or household members. And the next place will be in the automobile, where obviously the same sort of factors play out. So as we iron out the kinks of fusing voice with other biometrics, fusing biometrics with other sort of factors and things that are of importance to the deliverers of services, this is the way it gets personalized.
Well, thank you very much, Dan. And before I ask for additional comments there, I want to jump into the next question, actually, which has been mentioned a couple of times now, and that's around privacy. Because I want to make sure that we have time to address this one fully. Late in 2013, there was a privacy buzz surrounding the VoicePrint databases collected by banks and call centers. What are your thoughts on the importance of privacy when deploying voice biometrics? Are privacy concerns presenting a challenge to the voice industry, and how are you overcoming these challenges? And I'll throw that open.
Well, I'll chime in. So it's vital that, I mean, there will always be concerns from privacy advocates, and rightfully so. And people are getting more and more aware of the power of their own private data for a number of reasons. What I suggest we think about is how individuals take control of their own personal data and their personally identifiable data in order that they get, whatever service, whatever fabric, whatever relationships they have with the companies they want to do business with, to have their information used rationally. Now, what does that mean? It gets really, really interesting because we're not in all cases given control of our data. But that's one model to think about, is to make people aware that there are advantages to having their private data used on their behalf by things like an intelligent assistant, or by companies that want to offer them a better user experience. So relating to Julia's observation, there's going to be the need to use personal data in order to provide quality service, but there's got to be respect for individuals' control and of that data, and that the data not be abused.
Dan, that's an
Just to
excellent
add
response.
to what Dan said there, I think what people need to also understand is the various laws around the collection and storage of biometric data in the applicable state or country that the deployment's happening in. What we've seen in all of our production deployments is that active user consent for the collection of their biometric is extremely important, and that can be accomplished simply just through a conversation with a call center agent within an IVR, or presented in text in a mobile application. But we found to address some of the legal issues and the privacy issues around enrolling the biometric of a customer, that acceptance is extremely important. We've also found that in some countries you have to show that biometric data is still providing a benefit, meaning that if for some reason a customer terminates their affiliation with an organization, it's important to show that you have a process in place to remove that personal biometric data.
Thank you very much. Now,
let me also make a point here, and Hesse already mentioned that one of the key discussions around privacy and security of biometric solution is happening right now around the two types of architectures that are being used right now. One is the client side, and another one is the server side. And we see some pros and cons in both systems, and I think that our job as a vendor is to be able to give the customers clear choice and capabilities to apply both. And we actually have solutions both in for the client side and for the server side. So for the server side, it's a lot of organizations find it very useful to have the biometric data stored behind the firewall on their own servers, where they can control this environment, where they can control the security, where they can act very quickly in case of a leak or a break-in. On the other hand, if you're storing your biometric information on your mobile device or on the client's mobile devices, how do you, as an organization, even know that that particular device was broken into? So there are a lot of concerns here, and we're working as an industry to find the new standards, and FIDO is doing a great job here. But I think it's very important to provide customers with an educated choice as to what type of architecture you as a customer would like to deploy.
Thank you very much. Okay, we're getting a lot of questions in from the attendees, and I want to start to move to those questions. But just before I do, I have one final question for the panel, and I'll just ask you to be brief because I do want to get to these questions. There are some really good ones here. What, in your opinion, is the next big step for voice biometrics? And maybe, Jesus, can you start us off with that one?
The next big step for voice biometrics, I think, is like Alexei was saying, is finding the balance, according to the specification of clients and the preference of clients, is how I'm gonna provide the service, either running this on a server with its pros and cons, or running this on a mobile environment. And the core of that question is about privacy. So what is going to provide the right balance between security, convenience, and privacy? So for us, this is the main question for voice biometrics when we move into like the outside the government or the banking industries. And the other one for me, I think, is how do we standardize testing and around biometrics? Is everyone has its own story, is very fragmented, and I think we're lacking standardization. FIDO is trying to address this somehow. Agnitio is a founding member of FIDO, and we're very happy that that alliance grew to over 170 people, 70 companies right now, and we are very excited that the whole industry across reliant parties, device manufacturers, payment providers are joining the initiative to see how we standardize authentication. And for us, this is key, and we're happy to see that this is going in the right direction, and there's a lot of interest.
Great. Julia, anything to add there?
Yeah, I would say that, I agree that it's important that we look at the options for consumers as far as on-device versus a cloud-based authentication solution. However, what I'm really seeing is the next big step is, mass consumer rollouts of voice biometrics specifically within mobile applications. And as I mentioned earlier, we're already seeing budgets being approved for projects in both the commercial and government sectors for voice biometric rollouts to user bases in the tens of millions of users. So I'm pretty bullish that between now and the end of 2016, we're going to see the number of people using voice biometrics increase dramatically from the numbers Dan presented.
Terrific. And Alexei, anything to add in there?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that the next big thing for voice biometrics, and let's kind of dream big here, I think that voice biometrics will essentially kill the passwords. And there's been a lot of talk about killing the passwords. The passwords, that's the core technology that we use right now for logging into applications and accounts. This technology was developed over 2,000 years ago by Roman army. So I think it's time to replace this with a bit of a more modern approach. And I think that voice biometric can actually provide this capability whether by itself or in combination with other mobilities. We really see this trend of replacing the password as a primary way of logging in with voice biometrics or the biometrics means. And the other trend that I think is going to happen within the next few years is the increasing use of the free speech text-independent voice biometric technologies, where it's embedded into various types of IVRs or virtual assistant type of scenarios where you don't even where the biometrics is done very transparent and without any additional efforts from the user.
Well, thank you, Alexei.
Peter, let me add a brief other thing that I think is a big factor, and Alexei actually everybody nibbled on this. Reducing customer effort on the one hand means becoming transparent and moving to the background, and that certainly is a very big deal. It's also part of the user control theme that I brought up earlier, and one of the things we found out with the USAA implementation that they just publicized, that is voice and face, is that when given the choice, the customer is actually preferring sort of the silent treatment or the face part, but voice remains necessary. So adoption will be multi-factor. That's and multi-biometric, and it may just be that the user preference is sort of a face first, but also wanting voice there. So that's an interesting sort of mind map going on.
Dan, thank you so much. And Alexei, I just wanted to add in that your point about the password is dead. Maxine Most from Acuity Intelligence, was somebody I highly respect in the industry. She and I held a webinar a year ago called "The Password is Dead." So I really do think that the momentum is certainly gaining there. But now I want to jump into the questions from the attendees, as there are many. First one, here is a question about hacking. How easy is it to hack voice print versus, say, fingerprints?
I'll take that if this is Jesus from Magnitio. So, you know, for us, security, we take security on three different levels. One is accuracy, the other one is anti-spoofing, and the other one is anti-hacking. So when you look at anti-hacking, that means that you need to, you know, all biometrics are the same, right? What are you going to do with the credentials that you generate when someone enrolls with his or her voice print? So there are very different ways to protect that. You can do this in software with white box cryptography, or you can just use the mobile environment on the trust and execution environment that is available in all the chips that are in the high-end smartphones today, or use a secure element that is a separate chip that goes inside phones. For example, this is Apple's approach and Samsung approach on the high-end devices. So all biometrics are the same. They have the same problem for hacking, and you need to protect the credentials that you generate at enrollment, and also where you run the, you know, your secret sauce on your algorithms. They have to be protected somehow. So it's the same for voice, it's the same for fingerprint, for face, and there are mechanisms to protect that. And you know, your biometrics solution is going to be as strong as your anti-hacking solution. So a good question.
Anybody else like to add into that?
Well, I think that yes, this is Alexei Hitler from SpeechPro. Well, I think it's one of the key questions, and they're kind of two-tier approach that we favor. One is that we need to constantly improve the core biometric algorithms for voice biometrics, and that's why we invest quite heavily in R&D capability to make sure to that we see constant improvement of the algorithm. The other thing that we see. The other possibility for improving security is use of multi-factor as an additional anti-spoofing mechanism. And I'll give you an example. When we're combining voice and face, and when we collect the data simultaneously, what our technology does is actually it does some lip reading. So we're making sure that the person is actually saying the right things at the right time during the voice this multi-factor verification session. So by combining voice and face, we're not getting 1 + 1 is 2. We're getting 1 + 1 is 3. And by adding these additional security capabilities, I think we're working hard towards preventing hackers from breaking into the system.
I think the other interesting thing that you look at with voice biometrics over some of the other alternatives is that it can be dynamic. So what you're requested to say to prove your identity can change, and you raised the USAA deployment, and their approach, combining voice and face, but the voice piece is also dynamic. So again, that is a good approach to dealing with people who want to attack the system.
Thank you very much. And there are a couple of questions about external elements, noise, picking up a clear voice, print, etc. Could we address that, please?
Yeah, big question for voice, right? For fingerprint, dirt would be the problem. For us in voice biometrics, noise is the biggest issue. Noise and far field. Imagine sometimes you're going to be speaking to the TV and you're not, you're far from the TV, right? So and the TV will want to recognize you. So there are a couple of elements there, and there are many different type of noises: stationary, non-stationary. So as long as you don't have noise robustness embedded in your voice biometric engine, it's going to be very difficult to provide like a consistent experience, and this is going to put adoption in danger. So when Apple released Siri the first time, it was difficult for them because in noisy environment it wasn't working very well. They improved this very, very much, and if you test speech recognition applications today, they are very robust to noise. And in voice biometrics, we need to go in the same path and at least match what voice recognition, speech recognition is doing today. So another good question.
I think actually, Peter, it might be a good thing to promote on your site. We started to collect videos because we always, I think in the industry we always get this question. So we started to collect videos of people verifying, users verifying in challenging environments. And I've got a great video clip of somebody at Fenway Park actually verifying their voice, and how loud it can get there.
I'd love to see that. Please send that through. I'd be happy to put that forward. I'm going to jump to another.
And Peter, let me just add one more thing from the best practices report, because there's two aspects of this. One is the quality of the enrollment and the environment that the enrollment takes place in, and where some people say it's good to do it in a quiet place with the device you're always going to be using. There's a couple of schools of thought, but use the device you're going to be using. Use it in the environment that you're going to be using it in, and then one of the best practices is just to say for the organization that's implementing to make sure it's a strong voice print, that there's enough material to be able to be used for later authentication. And then what Jesus, I guess both Jesus and Alexei were saying, you're going to see some, when you're talking about breakthroughs, you're going to see some pretty big steps in both either noise elimination that's being done programmatically or with the system, and also improvements in mics that have been happening primarily to support the sort of intelligent assistance or the speech rec and understanding of other applications. So those two things are working in our favor.
Okay, the final question. User experience is a hot topic these days. What are the benefits of voice here?
The way we position in our marketing material, voice is it is secure, and when I talk about security, I talk about those three levels that I mentioned before. This is about accuracy, getting to as close as 90 and 100% accuracy as possible. The anti-spoofing part of it, that if someone records my voice and tries to impersonate me, the system is not going to let him in because the system is going to recognize that it's a recording and it's not a real voice. And then the anti-hacking, that was part of another question, right? So what are you going to do with the credentials that you generate for the user if you need to store them in encrypt them in like secure elements so that it's not easy to hack it. And so this is security, and this is one part of how we sell voice. The other one is universal. So you have voice is ubiquitous, right? All devices that we have today at home, they have microphones. TV, your laptop, your tablet, your phone. So you can add voice biometrics to any devices. So it's, and then it's very it's natural, right? This is what you do. I mean, people talk. You don't have to touch anything. So it's very natural for people to use voice biometrics. And then it's cost, right? I mean, if you look at fingerprint, it's kind of expensive to put a fingerprint sensor into mobile devices today, right? But voice, you just need a microphone and some small software that runs on devices, so it's very cost effective. So those are the main differentiators for voice. You can also talk about, you can use passphrases to authenticate users, so you can use text independent. So natural speech, this is what Agnitio launched at CES this year. So you could just do both on a mobile environment running locally. So these are like major elements for people to adopt voice, along other biometric solutions in a multi-factor approach. But voice is certainly one of the preferred options that people will have.
Thanks, Jesus. Julia, anything?
Typically, when you look at the go ahead, Julie.
I was just going to say, with the usability studies that we've gone through for some of our larger customers, consumers, we come back to the password is dead. Well, it's not really dead yet, unfortunately, and we're all forced to use these strong passwords. So if we look at why voice is good, why is it positive user experience, you can use your voice to simply say a very short phrase, be verified, and access things on your mobile device without having to try to type this cumbersome, long, strong password into that small form factor. It's a much better user experience.
Alexi?
Typically, when you look at the enterprise and the struggle to improve the security, what we see is that the enterprise is typically improving the security at the expense of the user experience, and deploying voice can actually stop this tug of war and allow to improve the security and improve the user experience at the same time. So forget about long passwords where you need to remember which letters are capital, which are not, the symbols and so on and so forth. And just use your voice. Voice is something that you have. In case of the dynamic passwords, you don't need to remember anything. You'll be prompted to say your to say whatever it is the system is asking you to say. So you don't need to carry anything around. You don't need to remember anything. It's all in front of you, and it's more secure. So I think it really is the value proposition that is hard to miss.
Thanks, Alexi. And Dan, you have the last word.
Jeez, thank you. No, so it's not a technological issue. I think what discussions like this reveal is that a lot of thought has gone into the technology around security, around efficacy, and that sort of thing. But customer experience spans all sorts of organizations within the companies that are going to deploy it. And voice biometrics is on the radar there. And the idea of having a friction-free way of having confidence that your customer is whom he or she claims to be is something that's very important, and it means that there's going to be organic demand for voice or voice and other factors to be incorporated into this customer experience that begins to look more and more or behave more and more like an intelligent assistant that individuals are using, and that's going to pull voice and other authentication factors into the mix as people design thoughtful customer experience.
Thank you, Dan. And I'd like to extend a thanks to Peter Counter, our managing editor. If you haven't read his articles on our site, please check them out. You'll find them really interesting. He's been quite amazing this month putting all that information together. And Jessica Fife, our marketing manager, who has been responsible for making sure that we got people attending, which we certainly did. So thank you both. We will be holding another webinar during our Physical Access Month in April to coincide with ISC West. More to come on that. And I'd like to thank our sponsors again who have been very supportive. Ignicio, VoiceVault, and SpeechPro, but especially to Dan Miller from Opus for his expert analysis today. This concludes our webinar. Thank you very much for attending. Again, this will be available in a recorded fashion on findbiometrics.com. Have a good day, all.